Concentration camps, an iconic element of Nazi Germany. From 1933 to 1945, hundreds of these sites of barbarity and annihilation were established across the European continent. Trains carried people into oblivion, slave labor fed a war machine, and the systematic extermination of millions advanced without pity. All of these steps were gears in a mechanism designed by the most sinister minds of Nazism. Today, we will explore the most significant concentration camps in this dark chapter of humanity. Auschwitz-Birkenau. Anyone entering through its main gate encountered a macabre inscription, Arbeit macht frei. The phrase meant, work sets you free, an allusion to the slavery to which inmates were reduced. For the Nazis, prisoners would be liberated only by death from exhaustion, what they called extermination through labor. Auschwitz-Birkenau, located in Poland, became the most infamous concentration camp of Nazism because it was the largest detention and extermination complex of the Third Reich. It comprised three main facilities: Auschwitz I, base camp, Auschwitz II Birkenau, extermination camp, and Auschwitz III Monowitz, forced labor camp. Although it opened in 1940 to house Polish political prisoners, it later became the nucleus of the genocide of the Jewish population. Its reputation was forged by the massacre of 960,000 Jews in the camp. In addition, 74,000 Poles, 21,000 Roma, Romani, and 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war were murdered there. Technical innovations, such as gas chambers and crematoria at Birkenau, enabled this infamous mass slaughter. On January 27, 1945, the Red Army reached the outskirts of the camp. Upon entering, they found 60,000 dying inmates, mostly Jews, who had survived a recent death march. Between 1940 and 1945, the Auschwitz-Birkenau complex received 1.3 million deportees. Of these, 1.1 million people were exterminated there. A true hell on earth. Dachau. This site could be called the Serpent's Egg, as it was the first concentration camp created by the National Socialist regime. It opened on March 22, 1933. Just a few months after Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. At that time, the newly designated Inspector of Concentration Camps, Theodor Eicke, was tasked with turning Dachau into the prototype for all subsequent camps. It also served as a training ground for SS guards who were later assigned to other detention centers.
Dachau, near München, one of the oldest of the Nazi prison camps. It is known that from 1941 to 1944, up to 30,000 people were entombed here at one time, and 30,000 were present when the Allies reached Dachau. The Nazis said it was a prison for political dissenters, habitual criminals, and religious enthusiasts.
Dachau was located near the city of Munich. Although at first it was intended merely for political prisoners, its population increased considerably when its scope expanded to include Jews, Roma, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and other minorities. On April 29, 1945, American troops reached this factory of horrors. Inside, 30,000 starving inmates wandered aimlessly. The Allies ordered local civilians to come and witness the atrocities that had taken place under their noses for so long. During its years of operation, Dachau held more than 200,000 prisoners, of whom 40,000 were savagely exterminated. Buchenwald. Located in the German city of Weimar, it stood out as one of the largest camps within German territory. It began operations in 1937, initially admitting only political prisoners and repeat criminals. However, as in other camps, it later included Jewish, Soviet, Roma, and homosexual detainees. Another infamous aspect of this site was the inhumane medical experimentation carried out on prisoners.
It states that 1,000 boys under 14 years of age are included among the 20,000 still alive at the camp, that the survivors are males only, and that the recent death rate was about 200 a day.
On April 11th, 1945, the U.S. Third Army took control of Buchenwald. The Americans rescued 20,000 survivors, among them 4,000 Jews and 1,000 children. These children were transported by train for shelter, but when the train passed through French stations, it was pelted with stones. Why the attack? Locals believed the wagons carried young Nazis, not survivors of an extermination camp, and they assaulted them in protest. To prevent further incidents, the Allies added a chilling inscription to those wagons: Orphans of Buchenwald. In total, 250,000 prisoners were held in this camp, and 56,000 were murdered. Sachsenhausen. This detention site lay north of Berlin, the German capital. It was established in 1936 as a prototype for future camps. It originally imprisoned politicians who opposed the Führer's dictatorship. But later Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Russians were also held there. Living conditions were terrible, as inmates were subjected to forced labor and medical experimentation.
The cell block in Sachsenhausen was for punishments. Prisoners who contravened camp regulations or fell from grace in any way were placed in detention in a blacked-out cell. Here, food rations were even more meager than usual. For many, a visit to the cells meant certain death. There were also special cells used by the Berlin Gestapo for interrogation and torture. Prisoners were suspended from these hanging posts by their arms.
During its years of operation, 140,000 people were held there, and between 30,000 and 50,000 were massacred without mercy. On April 22, 1945, the Soviet Army arrived to liberate the survivors of Sachsenhausen, Ravensbrück. The name of this camp translates as Bridge of Ravens. It was located 90 kilometers from Berlin. Opened in 1939, what made it unique was that it was exclusively for women. Around 130,000 prisoners passed through its barracks, including political activists, Jews, Roma, and lesbians. Nazi doctors used their bodies for sadistic experiments. The camp also had gas chambers, which became the preferred method of extermination used by the Nazis there.
A day later, we had to line up, and they brought kettles, but we were pushing so hard to these kettles. The kettles turned over, but in front of the tent was the frozen, soil, and it was like glass, shiny. The food poured outside, and the food was gone. You know what we did? We were laying down and licking the food from the ice.
The population of Ravensbrück was very heterogeneous, with only 10% of Jewish origin. Initially, the first 2,000 detainees were German women who had not obeyed the Führer's mandates. Apart from the children, who were of both sexes, the only thing the prisoners shared was being female. On April 30th, 1945, Russian shock troops arrived at Ravensbrück to free its captives. They also found men in a subcamp established in 1941. Altogether, more than 130,000 female prisoners and 20,000 men passed through this camp. Between 20,000 and 30,000 of them were killed. Mauthausen-Gusen. Founded in Austria in 1938, its purpose was to detain political prisoners and enemies of the Nazi state. This concentration camp was infamous for the extreme brutality of the forced labor imposed on its inmates.
When the Russians neared Vienna, I was taken to this Mauthausen concentration lager, an extermination camp, the worst in Germany.
where we have been starving and beaten and killed. Fortunately, my turn hadn't come.
Prisoners at Mauthausen-Gusen were forced to carry enormous blocks of stone up the 186 steps of the quarry. This grueling ascent was known as the Stairs of Death. If the Nazis discovered that a prisoner was too sick or weak to meet work demands, they separated that person from the others to be murdered in the camp's gas chamber, in a mobile gassing station, or at the Hartheim Euthanasia Center. The camp's medical staff used phenol syringes, a highly toxic chemical, to kill bedridden patients. On May 5, 1945, American soldiers arrived to liberate the camp. During its operation, a total of 199,400 inmates were held in Mauthausen. In the main camp and its subcamps, 119,000 people perished. 1/3 of them were Jews. Majdanek. This detention center stood in the Polish city of Lublin. At first, it was intended solely for Soviet prisoners of war, but later it was used for forced labor and extermination. It was active from 1941 to 1945, housing Jews, political prisoners, and Polish civilians. Survival conditions were extremely harsh, especially for Jewish inmates. Excluding the subcamps, SS agents sent about 90,000 Jews to Majdanek. Among them were 56,500 from Poland, 26,000 from Lublin, 20,000 from the Warsaw Ghetto, 6,500 from the Białystok Ghetto, and about 4,000 transferred from other camps between November 1943 and May 1944. Additionally, there were 17,500 inmates brought from across Europe, 8,500 Slovaks, 3,000 Czechs and Moravians, 3,000 Germans and Austrians, 2,000 French, Dutch, and Greeks, and 1,000 Jews who arrived after November 3, 1943. On July 24, 1944, Soviet forces took possession of Majdanek. It was the first major extermination camp liberated by the Allies. The facilities were nearly intact, and the Soviets invited journalists to document the atrocities committed there. Around 78,000 people were exterminated in Majdanek, 59,000 of them of Jewish descent. Stutthof. What made this site particular was that it was the first concentration camp built outside German territory. In fact, it was constructed in 1939 in the Polish town of Gdansk. Political prisoners, Jews, Russians, and Polish civilians were confined there. Living conditions in Stutthof were nearly impossible, as 2 typhus epidemics ravaged the camp during the winters of 1942 and 1944. Those who showed weakness or signs of illness were sent directly to the gas chamber. On May 10, 1945, Stutthof was the last camp to be liberated by the Allies. Before that, the remaining prisoners were forced on death marches. Of the 110,000 inmates sent there, around 85,000 were executed. Treblinka. This site was operational from 1942 to 1943 and was designed as the ideal place for the systematic extermination of people. In less than 12 months, 900,000 Jews were gassed. An unavoidable event in the camp's history was the prisoner uprising of August 1943. During it, 300 people managed to escape. However, 200 were tracked down and executed by the Germans. As a consequence, the remaining prisoners were ordered to dismantle the camp. After this exhausting task, SS agents and German police shot all the survivors. On August 16, 1944, when the Soviets reached Treblinka, the extermination site had already been leveled, plowed, and covered with vegetation. Sobibor. Located in Poland, This camp was an integral part of Operation Reinhard, tasked with exterminating Jews in Nazi-occupied Poland. Approximately 250,000 Jews were gassed in its facilities. In October 1943, a group of Jewish and Soviet prisoners led an uprising in the camp, enabling the escape of 300 inmates. These events led to its closure and subsequent dismantling. It is estimated that at least 167,000 prisoners were killed in Sobibor. In Nazi concentration camps, 6 million Jews were murdered. Today, the vast majority of these camps serve as museums, memorials, and sanctuaries that preserve the memory of an indelible stain on human history. And now, after sharing key information about the massacres in the Nazi concentration camps, it is time to say goodbye. Thank you very much for staying with us until the end. We look forward to seeing you again in our next episode of Military History.